project, I'm talking about diversity in an educational environment. So in my presentation, I'll be discussing my 10 hours of observation and the conclusions I drew from them relating to teaching and being a speech-language pathologist, but mostly as being a speech-language pathologist because that's my major and that's the whole reason I did this project, was to gain experience for that. So my cultural autobiography, so a little bit about me. I have very little experience with immigration. I grew up in a predominantly white area and went to schools with little diversity, so coming into college was my first real experience with it. I grew up in a middle class and never truly had to worry about money. I was raised very religious in a strict denomination of Christianity. I never truly experienced special needs in my life, really, and I know it's something I will work a lot with as a speech pathologist. And I really appreciated getting the opportunity to experience these things before experiencing it in a work setting. So I really liked being able to just do this in a laid back kind of way instead of just being thrown into it as I start working. Okay, so for my observation 1, it was interviews with immigrants, and I interviewed 5 immigrants. So for my first set of observations was focused on immigration. I interviewed 5 different people who all immigrated here for college. I interviewed 5 different people from Kenya, Uruguay, Nigeria, Mexico, and England. I asked each of them similar questions about their culture and beliefs. I asked them similar questions such as family values and beliefs, education in home countries, logistics and difficulty of coming to the US, differences between here and their home country. I asked them a few more questions to get to know them a little bit better as a person, but I feel like that didn't really, go with what I'm talking about. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of them said and each of their backgrounds. But I just wanted to state, how new all of this information was for me because I've lived in the US my whole life, so it's really cool to experience different cultures and see pretty much where everyone else comes from and how they live life where they are. Okay. So I learned that most other countries strongly value traditional gender roles in families, and generally value family relationships more than the US. Now, this isn't to say that we don't value family relationships here. I just think that people in different cultures tend to value it more. So they have stronger ties to their family than we do here. But that's not to say that we don't value them here. It is also prevalent that education is much different in other countries. Some move faster, while most of them move slower and don't go as in-depth as they do here. So, talking to them, I learned in each different country, some of them went at a much faster pace, and they felt that they were learning things here that they would have learned in high school, but most of them felt that the education system was a lot better here than in their home countries. Most of the students I interviewed did come here to get a better education and have more opportunities in their postgraduate life. I got a really good insight to what it's like to try and come to the US. Even on a student visa, there's still so much paperwork and legalities to go through. So, the guy that I interviewed that was from Kenya, he was the one that said that their education moved at a faster pace. And he said that he felt like he learned better in Kenya, but he also said that he attended private school and boarding school most of his life, where, the other people I talked to maybe didn't have those opportunities, and there was just a limited options for education that they could choose from. So that way, they said that it wasn't as in-depth as it is here, and it wasn't as hands-on. The guy that I talked to from Uruguay, he said that here in the US, you go more in depth on your field of study and you're more prepared to go out into the world than you would have been in Uruguay. So he says that here, in Uruguay, they don't do labs, they don't do anything like that, so you have no real hands-on experience before you're actually put into the work world. Most of the people that I talked to said that they were planning on staying here after college and that they wanted to get their visas and live here, but it's extremely hard to get visas is what I've learned. I didn't realize it was as difficult as it was. But Maria was telling me, one of the girls I interviewed, that it took her so long just to get her student visa, and there's still so much paperwork she had to do, and there's still so many rules and things that they have to follow because they are on a student visa. Like, she was telling me she can't work off of campus. You know, she has to go get a social security number to get her license, but apparently getting a social security number is a process because she's not a citizen, so she can't really get a driver's license. So it's just a lot more went into it than I thought. So overall, I learned how difficult it is to come to the US, and those of us that are already citizens may not realize how lucky we have it here. I learned how coming from different cultures impacts the way you interact with people and the way that you think. I really enjoyed getting to know each person and learning a little bit about cultures I had never really experienced before. One thing to say about the different cultures and the way that people think, the person I interviewed from Kenya, his mannerisms are very different than what we have here, and it took me a little bit to get used to, but then I realized that, like, they just see different things as normal than we do here. So that was a big shock for me, that, like, you can consider things impolite here, but in their home countries, it doesn't, like, it's not rude. So it's just certain things like that. And the person from England that I interviewed, they never truly held eye contact with me when we were talking, and I feel like that was also a cultural thing, because I feel like here we're very like, oh, if I'm speaking, you need to be looking at me to show me that you're listening, but it might not be like that in other places. Okay, so for my second observation, I shadowed at a speech and language clinic near my house, so that's what I did for that. So I shadowed at Cobb Speech and Language, a pediatric speech and language clinic. For the focus of this observation, I wanted to highlight special needs children because I know I will frequently work with them as a speech-language pathologist. I shadowed there for a total of 6 hours, from 9 to 12 on Monday and Wednesday. This was honestly a valuable experience because not only did it put me in a contact with special needs children in a professional setting, it also gave me a glimpse into what my future could look like if I chose to work in a private practice after I graduate from college. I got to see all types of special needs, children with autism, Down syndrome, and children who are nonverbal. I observed that speech pathologists help the children navigate their way through visual boards, sentence strips, and speech tablets. These exercises were extremely unique because they provided nonverbal and special needs children with means to express themselves. I really enjoyed seeing the way special needs kids reacted with their environment and the people around them. What struck me the most was how much more of a struggle it is for people with special needs to do the same tasks or communicate the same things that others do. Communicating was one huge thing that seemed to be monumentally different between special needs children and other children. Through their body language, you could tell they have a lot of thoughts, feelings, and emotions, but they tend to get frustrated when they can't express themselves the way they want to. So this would often lead to outbursts of, poor behavior. But one thing I really admired the therapists for, like, they knew that wasn't the children intentionally, acting up. It was just that they were frustrated, they were confused, they didn't understand. So it's really good that they were super lenient with them and, understood where they were coming from with their feelings. One thing that impacted me is how people can have the same type of special needs but can act completely different from one another. Before this experience, I assumed that all people with the same condition would act similarly, but I came to realize that just like everyone else, they're their own person with their own personalities. I realized I stereotyped them by their condition by putting them all into the same category. So I realized that, like, just because you're autistic doesn't mean you're going to act like this. Or just because you have Down syndrome doesn't mean you're going to act like this. Like, each of them are their own individual person, and that's something that I realized through this that I think is really beneficial. Okay, moving on. Diversity messages. So the following 4 statements are things that I've come to realize while completing my observation hours, and I think that other people pursuing my profession or any education profession would benefit from knowing. So, Regardless of disability, race, or other factors, each student is an individual. Obviously, I kind of touched on this, but I feel like this was important enough to have its own little message. So, all students deserve the same love, respect, and attention, but each student needs to be taught in a way that best suits their personality. Each student is an individual and has a unique way of learning. This will require you to get to know each student on a personal level, to get to know which kind of instruction resonates with them the most. When I shadowed at the clinic, I noticed that the therapists knew so much about their clients that they already knew if something would or would not help them before they even tried it. When gathering information from my interviews, I learned lots about how each place has a different way of education that each person was accustomed to, which leads to my next point, that each person has a unique story and past. So no two people have ever gone through the same exact thing in life, so you can't assume that you know completely what someone is going through. Like, no two immigrants have ever gone through the same thing to come to the US. Similarly, no two people with autism experience it the same. Just because they might be in the same situation does not mean that their experiences are the same. So I think definitely with trying to come to the US and immigration, this is a big one. Like, it's so difficult to come here, and they might be going through the same steps and the same processes, but they are not experiencing the same things. I learned through my interviews and through my time at the clinic that a person's past and things they have been through, while they don't define a person, are contributing factors to make them unique. As a teacher or a therapist, their background and past may affect the way you teach or interact with them. So you might need to dig deep into their culture and their past and learn about them to figure out like what works and what doesn't work with them. So my next diversity message is people are more than their race or their disability. I feel like all of these kind of go hand in hand. I feel like they all go together well. So as mentioned in the last slide, race, disability, and past do not define a person. And it's not something that you should, base your whole opinion of someone on. Each person has a distinctive personality and brain. You'll never be able to look at someone and assume their next actions, thoughts, or words based on just how they look or that you know that they have a disability. When I was at the clinic, I realized that each autistic child is different and each child with Down syndrome is different. And as a teacher or a therapist, it's important to look past their race or disabilities and look at the individual child. So I think there's a fine line between, using their differences, which I'll talk about in the next slide, using those to help them and, stereotyping them. So you want to look past it and be like, I'm not categorizing you into this, but I know that because you are this, it could help you with this, or that type of thing. Like pulling from it, but not categorizing them because they are, a certain race or a certain disability. And so my last diversity message is that we need to celebrate our differences. And so while our differences don't define us, they are something that make us unique. Characteristics such as race, culture, or disability are never anything to be ashamed of or to shame people about. They're things that contribute to making each person themselves. So as an educator in SLP, we really need to dive into those differences and use them as a way to connect and teach the child in a personal way. So if you know that the child has been through something or that they do something a certain way in their culture, you might want to continue to do that thing. Or if something is triggering to them, you'll want to avoid that. So it's certain things like that you'll want to make note of and use that to connect with the child, but not use it as a way to define them and who they are. Okay. So to sum it up, I have just a few slides to sum up everything that I've talked about. I think that a lot of this information is really important. Not just to teachers and SLPs, but just to everyone, just to be inclusive of people and obviously take their backgrounds into consideration, but don't use that, as a way that you view them, So, what did I learn and how will this help me as an SLP? So I learned to never make assumptions based off of someone based on their race or disability, and to never categorize people based off of those. I learned that each person has a different story. Whoa. Sorry. I learned that each person has a different story and a different past. Each person goes through a completely different experience, even if they are technically going through the same thing or have the same disability. And I learned that each person is an individual and should receive an individual education. This means that you really have to get to know them and work for them as an individual and like find out what works best for them as a person. Okay, strategies to help in working with students with disabilities or from different backgrounds. So the first thing is get to know your students. This will let you know them as a person and get to know what teaching style and strategies work for them. This will also help you build a personal relationship between you and the student, and that will build trust between you. Learn about your students' past and culture. The way they were raised and their culture has a big impact on the way they think and interact with others. This will give some explanation to why they act certain ways or do certain things. So if they're from a culture that you don't know about, maybe look into it a little bit and figure out, what they believe and why they do the things that they do. And then my last point is to take some time to really understand the child. I think this is especially important as an SLP because most of the children have a hard time communicating. That's why they need speech therapy. So I think taking the time to take the time to make sure that they know you're interested in understanding them, I think that will make them feel more valued, and it will build a stronger relationship between you and the student. So I think that's all I have. It is. So just thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped, gave you some insights on my observation hours and what I learned, and hopefully it can help you too. Thanks.